Welcome to the seminar Building on the ASEAN-Japan Golden Jubilee for a Shared Economic Future, reflecting views on the ASEAN-Japan Economic Co-Creation Vision, held by CSIS Indonesia to discuss the ties between ASEAN and Japan, as well as identifying challenges in advancing the ties. With AEM, METI, Economic and Industrial Cooperation, and Economic Research Institute. On this honorable occasion, I, Nadia Dalai, will be the host for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, a strong ASEAN-Japan relationship at a time like this, when sustainable economic and social outcomes require cooperation, not because of the regional and global leadership roles occupy. It is important that Japan and ASEAN take innovations that will lead solutions to social issues and lead a sustainable economic society together. Today's event will consist of 5 main agendas. The first one is opening remarks from Dr. Yose Rizal, Executive Director of the Center and International Indonesia. The second opening remark will be from His Excellency Kiya Masahiko, Ambassador of the Japan Mission to ASEAN, and keynote speech from His Excellency Arifin Tasrif, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia. The second agenda will be panel session 1, ASEAN-Japan cooperation in Indo-Pacific, bridging diverse interests. The next agenda would be a luncheon talk. The fourth one is a panel session, number 2, supporting energy transition and a greener global value chain. And finally, panel session 3, leveraging innovation in the transformation and sustainable society. To begin the first agenda, we have several prominent individuals who will present some short opening remarks. May I welcome Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, his remarks. Pa Yose, you may have the
floor. His Excellency Minister Tasrif, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources of Republic Indonesia, His Excellency Ambassador Kiya Masahiko, Ambassador of the Mission of Japan to ASEAN, distinguished speakers from Japan and also from ASEAN countries who come all the way to Jakarta, as well as distinguished ladies and gentlemen who participate in this event in person and also through online platforms, Zoom and YouTube. A very good morning to all of you. And also have a good health and prosperity for all of us. I'm honored to welcome you to CSIS building to attend the seminar, this seminar building on the ASEAN-Japan Golden Jubilee for a shared economic future. This seminar is co-organized by Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS Jakarta, and Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, supported by the Ministry of Economic and Trade, also by the METI, Economic and Industrial Cooperation Committee. Again, thank you very much for attending and sparing your times to attend our seminar this morning. As we know, this year marks the 50th year relation between ASEAN and Japan. And this relation has contributed a lot to the stability and prosperity in these regions. If I'm not mistaken, Japan is the first dialogue partner of ASEAN, and Japan has supported progress in Southeast Asia in almost all aspects, from economic, diplomacy, some extent also on security issues. And this kind of relations was even stronger during the most challenging time, like we have 2 years ago during the pandemic, and also 25 years ago during the ASEAN financial crisis. So I think it's not really an exaggeration for me if I say that Japan is one of, if not the top partners of ASEAN. And we in ASEAN really fortunate that we have a trusted dialogue partner, a trusted strategic partner like Japan. However, the relations of this region is facing a new challenging strategic context. We just managed to get through the difficult pandemic time, but there are many other challenges that we need to face together. Like, for example, the intensifying strategic rivalry that is taking place in this region and may even endanger stability in Asia and Pacific. The recovery from pandemics, also, although quite successful, is still very unstable with the potential recessions looming. In much longer terms, proliferations of new and emerging technologies, and as well as challenges from decarbonization initiative, as well as maintaining supply chains need to be addressed properly. So in this challenging time, ASEAN has a very critical position to respond proactively to the situation. But ASEAN for sure cannot do this by itself alone. Strategic partners that share similar perspective, such as Japan, will provide a strong leverage to realize that kind of situation, more supportive situations in this region. This kind of year, 50 years of anniversary of ASEAN and Japan relations, I think it's a good start for us to strengthen the relations between the two regions and to come up also with new initiative that might be needed in order to face and in order to respond properly to the future challenge. And hopefully this seminar will also come up with new ideas, new and fresh recommendations and suggestions in order to strengthen the relations between ASEAN and Japan. Again, I really appreciate your participation, and hopefully we would have good discussions today and come up with good recommendations. Thank you very much for your times and your attention.
Thank you, Pa Yose, for your opening remarks. Before we continue to the next opening remark, we would like to apologize and take 2 minutes to open the partition in the back for more audience. Once again, we apologize and thank you for your patience. We will be starting again shortly. Next, it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Kiya, Ambassador of the Japan Mission to ASEAN, to deliver his opening remarks. You may have the floor.
Thank you. His Excellency Arifin Tasrif, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia, Dr. Rizal Damuri, Executive Director, CSIS Indonesia, distinguished speakers from many places, and ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. First and foremost, I'd like to express my heartfelt appreciation to CSIS and ERIA for organizing this timely seminar, and also METI and IMEC for their support. I would also like to thank all the speakers and moderators for contributing to today's event. It is a great pleasure for me to be with you all, including those on YouTube and Zoom who are taking time to get together for this seminar. I have just a few messages to share with you. And first and most important thing is that this year is a big opportunity for ASEAN and Japan, including all of us in Indonesia. The priority of Indonesia as ASEAN chair this year has been made clear under the theme ASEAN Matters, the epicentrum of growth. ASEAN, led by Indonesia, now aspires to play a central role as the engine of growth, stability, and prosperity in the region and beyond, in an inclusive manner, stability, and through innovation. ASEAN is getting more important than ever, and this has clearly been demonstrated by the ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo just held last week. And also, this year is the 50th year of ASEAN-Japan friendship and cooperation. And Prime Minister Kishida expressed so many times that his commitment to raising the relationship between Japan and ASEAN to a new stage and setting out a new vision for cooperation on this occasion. There are a number of important events, including this seminar, to accelerate the momentum leading up to the upcoming summit in December this year. And secondly, I'd like to highlight the importance of Japan's commitment to ASEAN and our joint achievements. Simply put, Japan has always been with ASEAN to overcome the challenges together, and will always be. As Dr. Rizal said, it all started in 1973 when ASEAN was united to address the issue of growing import of synthetic rubber from Japan. That turned out to be a very successful experience of ASEAN's external engagement, and Japan is proud to be the very first partner of ASEAN since that time. And I must emphasize that despite all the challenging history in the past, in 1977, after the first ASEAN-Japan summit in Kuala Lumpur, then Prime Minister Fukuda in the Philippines outlined Japan's vision for its relationship with ASEAN. This included our commitment to peace and not becoming a military power, the heart-to-heart relationship based on mutual trust, and above all, the support for ASEAN's own efforts to strengthen their solidarity and resilience. And this vision in 1977 is still valid today. And ASEAN achieved historic industrialization in the 1980s and 90s and overcame a number of challenges. One is the Asian financial crisis in 1997, where Japan responded in the form of ASEAN Plus 3 through a Chiang initiative, and now it's being multilateralized. Japan took an active engagement. And also in 2000, we supported ASEAN through the tsunami, and we supported the AHA Center, which is a disaster management center of ASEAN. And most recently, faced with the pandemic crisis, we supported the ACFEED, the ASEAN Center for Emerging Diseases. All those commitments were demonstrated. At that time, we worked on JIFE, that is the Japan ASEAN Integration Fund, and also ERIA, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. All are strongly supported by Japan. And most recently, Japan, our Prime Minister, it was just recently in India that we announced an additional contribution of $100 million to Japan ASEAN Integration Fund for the new free and open Indo-Pacific plan, which is really working well with AOIP, that is ASEAN's vision for the Indo-Pacific. And thirdly, I'd like to emphasize the importance of this year's initiative, that is ASEAN-Japan Economic Co-Creation Vision. On this occasion of the 50th year of ASEAN-Japan Friendship and Cooperation, the Japanese got together to make a working draft to lay out the vision of ASEAN-Japan cooperation for the future. That includes digitalization and decarbonization, all the initiatives. And this initiative, which started last year, can only be complete with events like this seminar, where all the ASEAN engagement is ensured. It is the joint effort between ASEAN and Japan to make a new vision. And it is my pleasure that the CSIS Indonesia, together with ERIA, organize this so that the ASEAN input can be fully integrated into the upcoming vision leading up to the summit. The core part of this draft co-creation vision, I would like to summarize, is focusing on 4 pillars: sustainability, innovation, connectivity, and human capital. There will be a live discussion today on many issues, including the geopolitical challenges, so that we can realize this vision and how we can improve first and to work on the path to realize this vision. And let me conclude my remarks by just highlighting the upcoming major events. You may have noticed just last week that on the occasion of the Lavamalo Summit, the dates for the ASEAN-Japan Commemorative Summit was announced. That will be from the 16th to the 18th of December. Date was collectively announced by the ASEAN leaders, and the Japanese government also announced that date. So now the target is set. And more importantly, we are organizing, together with ASEAN, a number of important events. One is the Business Summit, also the Young Leader Summit. But most important, Generation Z Summit, ensuring the engagement of the young generation. It is my belief, as I came here, as I observed so many young Indonesians, really with bright faces, working a lot, doing plenty of innovation. It is my belief that those young people, both from ASEAN and Japan, will make the future. So I'm hoping that today's event is not only for those in Japan and ASEAN, but in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, as AOIP really promotes through the entire world, because ASEAN is the epicenter of growth in the world. And also, it's not only for the very senior established leaders like Minister Arifin or Dr. Rizal, but also, and I've become very old now. I'm now 58. But the young people who are watching, listening to this, and who are gonna make the world. So we've done this 50 years achievement. So we are hoping that our work today will pave the way for another 50 years and beyond. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. Next, it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Arifin, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia, to deliver his keynote speech. Your Excellency, you may have the floor.
Excellency, Ambassador of Japan for ASEAN, Mr. Yose Rizal, the Executive Director Center of Strategic International Studies, CSIS, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm quite familiar with this office because previously my office is just in front of CSIS. And my family is the friend of the founder of CSIS, the Vannarith family. So, it is a pleasure for me to participate in the seminar commemorating the 50th anniversary of ASEAN-Japan cooperation with the theme of building on the ASEAN-Japan Golden Jubilee for a shared economic future. My deepest appreciation to CSIS, AEM, METI, Economic and Industrial Cooperation Committee, and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, ERIA, for initiating this prestigious event. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of ASEAN-Japan relations, let me begin by reflecting the strong and historic ties between ASEAN and Japan, which have been built on a foundation of mutual trust, respect, and cooperation. No doubt, Japan has played a big role in ASEAN, supporting economic growth in all sectors. Japan has been a key partner for ASEAN in promoting regional integration, economic growth, and development, and has contributed significantly to ASEAN through its expertise, technology, and investment. Last week, the 42nd ASEAN Summit has been held in Labuan Bajo, which produced several key deliverables, such as developing regional electric vehicle ecosystem by recognizing the significant role of adopting electric vehicles to improve energy security in the region and improving the electric vehicles industry in ASEAN member states. We are in the hopes that ASEAN can be the center, develop as the center of the electric vehicle industry. Second is advancing regional payment connectivity and promoting local currency transactions to foster bilateral and multilateral connectivity in arrangement to strengthen economic integration by enabling fast, seamless, and more affordable cross-border payments across the region. Strengthening of ASEAN's capacity and institutional effectiveness and the development of the ASEAN community post-2025 vision. We recognize that our new vision should have political, economic, and socio-cultural relevance that binds our whole community together, which can then truly become a united, efficient, and inclusive connectivity. We are determined to make Southeast Asia the center of regional economic growth and an engine for global growth through robust cooperation, including in the food, energy, health, and finance sectors. ASEAN Summit's deliverables could be also related with G20 Leaders Declaration 2022 in terms of strengthened multilateral trade and resilience of global supply chains to support long-term growth, sustainable and inclusive green and just transition. We commit to accelerate achievement of the SDGs and achieving prosperity for all through sustainable development. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN member states still highly rely on fossil fuel to meet rising demand for energy, which is vulnerable to the energy crisis and increased CO2 emission. We should improve energy security by accelerating clean energy transitions and reducing the need for fossil fuel imports and consumption. Energy security and consumption. Energy security becomes even more important on the way to net zero. ASEAN countries have already pledged for their net zero emission target to be achieved around mid-century. This commitment will be the foundation for the roadmap towards ASEAN net zero emission. The 10-member economies of ASEAN are among the world's fastest growing. The economic growth should support accelerated transition to sustainable energy and achieving net zero emission. The acceleration of energy transition in ASEAN region will significantly support the goals of Paris Agreement to halt the increasing of global temperature at pre-industrial level. Japan at G20 Summit 2022, Bali has launched the initiative of ASEC. It is expected that ASEC could serve as the driving force for a broader partnership among ASEAN countries to implement clean, sustainable, just, affordable, and inclusive energy transition towards carbon neutrality. We can take actions through ASEC platform in developing massive renewable energy infrastructures, research and development, developing affordable technology, and strong supporting industry. We should harness technology opportunities such as smart storage, smart systems, and digitalization, hydrogen, ammonia, electric vehicles, and its supporting industries, as well as carbon capture and utilization storage. Japan has several CCS, CCUS projects in oil and gas areas in Indonesia, Burundi, Sukawati, Jatbarang. Indonesia has a great potential to become CCS hub in Asia, as we have a large storage capacity. And then there is a regional demand and market that requires CO2 storage. CCS and CCUS is a starting point for a long-term investment and business for low carbon business in the future, as such as hydrogen, green ammonia, and others. ASEAN region has enormous resources on renewable energy, more than 17,000 gigawatt that could be a modality, used as a modality to develop renewable energy power plants in the energy transition. However, to distribute this renewable energy potential evenly, necessary infrastructure will be built. We need to build energy infrastructures, electricity, gas as the bridge to support the transition as soon as possible. This, of course, requires huge investment. According to IRENA report, to implement the energy transition, ASEAN needs financial close to the $30 billion by 2050, under a scenario of 1.5 degrees C with 100% renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, we are committed to working with Japan as our ASEAN partners to promote sustainable and inclusive growth, enhance regional connectivity and cooperation, and strengthen ASEAN's resilience and relevance in the global arena. We are working closely with our ASEAN partners and external stakeholders to accelerate energy transitions and meet the climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Arifin, for your opening speech. Let us now move on to our main agenda. As a region, it is inevitable to face diverse interests without challenges arising. ASEAN and Japan are faced with the momentum to strategize in order to overcome issues such as increasing geopolitical rivalry and ongoing crises. Guiding our discussion on the first session of the event, titled Strengthening ASEAN-Japan Cooperation in Indo-Pacific, Bridging Diverse Interests, will be Dr. Shafiah Fifi Muhibat, who is currently the Deputy Executive Director for Research at CSIS Indonesia. Before we commence, may I remind our audience that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the session. For audience that are present at the venue, please raise your hand and the moderator will invite you to deliver your question. I kindly suggest that you keep your questions short and straightforward. Do not forget to inform us of your name, affiliation, and the speaker who you'd like to address your question to. Without further ado, may I please welcome Dr. Shafiah Muhibat.
Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm going to first invite my fellow panelists to come join me to the stage. I see Dr. Vannarith Chheang. Please come on stage. Dr. Lina Alexandra and Dr. Aladdin Rillo. Professor Urata will be joining us. Could we have a round of applause for our speakers for today? So a very good morning, everyone. I hope that you are in good spirits of today. So we have heard our keynote speakers and all explain basically why we are holding this event at CSIS today and why basically ASEAN-Japan relations is of utmost importance to the development and growth of the region. So now we are moving on to our first session. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Shafiah Muhibat with CSIS. It's my honor and pleasure to moderate the first session of today. So the first session is titled Strengthening ASEAN-Japan Cooperation in Indo-Pacific, Bridging Diverse Interests. There are actually at least 4 issues that will be discussed today. The first one is basically discussing, the main strategic challenges in the region of Indo-Pacific. The main challenges that both ASEAN and Japan are facing with regards to the many developments in the Indo-Pacific region. The second issue that we'd like to discuss is the impacts of the geopolitical rivalry or the relations between U.S. and China. And what both Japan and ASEAN can do to respond to some of these impacts of the geopolitical rivalry. The third issue that we'd like to discuss, regarding several issues in the region, challenges, specifically on Myanmar case and how Japan and ASEAN can respond to some of these conflicts, such as the one happening in Myanmar. And the last is that we are trying to look into or tap into the experience that Indonesia is having as the chair of ASEAN and Japan as the G7 president this year and what they are planning to do to tackle some of the ongoing challenges of this year. And for that, I have the pleasure of having 4 very distinguished panelists with me this morning. The first one is Professor Shujiro Urata, who is joining us from Japan, and he is online. Good morning, Professor Urata. I hope you can hear us clearly from your side.
Good morning. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Urata is Professor Emeritus from the Waseda University and also currently Senior Research Advisor of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and in East Asia, or ERIA. Also Faculty Fellow at the Research Institute of Economy, Trade and Industry. Specially appointed fellow at the Japanese Center for Economic Research, and also he is affiliated with the Asian Development Bank Institute and the Institute of Developing Economies. The second speaker is Dr. Vannarith Chheang, my far left. Dr. Vannarith Chheang is now the president at the Asian Vision Institute and chairman of the Advisory Council of the National Assembly of Cambodia. He is also the founder and chairman of Angkor Social Innovation Park and founder and chairman of the Mekong Peace Boat and director of Asia-Pacific Secretariat. The third speaker on my right is my colleague, Dr. Lina Alexandra, currently the head of the Department of International Relations here at CSIS. And she is also responsible as the coordinator for our Myanmar Initiative Program at CSIS. And last but not least, my left is Dr. Aladdin Rillo, who is the Senior Economic Advisor for the Economic Research in East Asia, or ERIA. And before that, he worked at the ASEAN Secretariat for many years, where he held various positions, the latest being the Deputy Secretary General for the ASEAN Economic Community. So welcome to our all four speakers. So I explained briefly the four issues that we are trying to tackle this morning. So, and I'd like to begin by inviting to give his remarks. Thanks, yours, Professor.
Thank you. Right. Can you hear me okay? Or can you hear me?
Yes,
oh,
we
okay.
are hearing
Thank you very much
well, and then also seeing your talking points on the screen.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very important seminar. And I'm sorry that I am not there with you, but I'm happy to participate from Japan. And what I like to do is to talk about, well, mainly trade and investment related issues. Let me use my slide. Okay, all right. Yes, as we heard from the previous speakers, Japan and Indonesia and ASEAN have been faced by many challenges, which include climate change, energy and food security, geopolitical tensions, digital transformation, and also ineffective multilateral trading system, which I like to talk about. And trade has been very important for ASEAN and Japan to achieve economic growth. So that is the reason why I decided to pick up this issue. What are the challenges in terms of trade and investment that we are faced with in this region and globally too? First of all, okay, so specific challenges. We are observing deterioration in trading environment because of growing protectionism, growing government intervention in the form of like export restrictions, import restrictions, restrictions on foreign direct investment, which also contribute negatively to economic development of the region, and particularly Japan, Indonesia, and other ASEAN countries. And we'd like to know why this is happening. And I just said causal factors. These factors, such as global financial crisis in 2007-8, COVID pandemic in 2020 is still ongoing, and US-China rivalry. These are some of the very important causal factors which led to deterioration in trading environment, in my view. And one of the roots of the problem is the ineffective World Trade Organization. What are the roles that the WTO, World Trade Organization, are expected to play? They are expected to contribute to opening up the market, trade liberalization, liberalization in foreign direct investment, setting trade rules, and monitoring and enforcing trade rules, and dispute settlement. These are the important roles that WTO expected to play, but unfortunately, we don't see them playing that role effectively. And Faced with these problems, many countries have decided to take some countermeasures. Here, I pick up three of them: free trade agreements, plurilateral agreements, trade agreements, and setting up the multi-party inter-appeal arbitration arrangement, MPIA. So these are the countermeasures that some of the countries, some of the WTO members have decided to implement to deal with an ineffective WTO. Free trade agreements, of course, I don't think I need to explain what these are, but some of the important free trade agreements that we are involved with in ASEAN. Of course, the ASEAN Economic Community is much more than just free trade agreements. It has much, investment and so on. And also between Japan and ASEAN, ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership is an agreement, trade agreement, FTA. And we all know RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which came into effect last year. And CPTPP, Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Japan belongs to, but Indonesia hasn't. And in addition to these free trade agreements, of course, plurilateral agreements have been discussed. Trade agreements in digital trade, environmental goods, and so on. So these are two forms of setting up new rules. And in order to deal with a problem with dispute settlement function of the WTO, selected group of countries have started this MPIA, and as far as I understand it, Japan has decided to join, and I don't think Indonesia has yet. So these are some of the countermeasures which have been implemented by some WTO members. And as for Japan and ASEAN, particularly Indonesia, what I like to see is they contribute to the implementation of RCEP commitments by RCEP members. Specifically, I'd like to see monitoring and enforcement of these rules and commitments by RCEP members. And one, I think, very important way to achieve this is to set up a secretariat. And as far as I understand, this hasn't been finalized or decided yet. So I'd like to see Indonesia and Japan work jointly to contribute to the establishment of a secretariat of RCEP. And in addition to that, once secretariat is established, upgrading of RCEP commitments, some of the provisions such as e-commerce, digital trade, intellectual property rights, and so on. These can be upgraded, and I'd like to see them happen. And also enlargement of RCEP, possibly and hopefully by accepting new countries like India, maybe other South Asian countries like Bangladesh and so on. And as to the Indo-Pacific, which has been discussed and mentioned by previous speakers, this has become very important, not only economic, but also strategic reasons. And specifically, Japan introduced this free and open Indo-Pacific, FOIP, in early 2010s, I think. And ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, AOIP by ASEAN. And very recently, as we all know, the United States came up with this idea or initiative called Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPEF. And in addition to the US, Japan and Indonesia are the members of this IPEF. And I'd like to see Japan and Indonesia contribute to the establishment of IPEF, although well, we observers from outside cannot really see what's happening in terms of IPEF negotiations, but I'd like to see some of these contents be realized, achieving supply chain or global chain resiliency and so on. So again, I'd like to see Indonesia and Japan contribute jointly to IPEF. And one reason is because this is consistent, in my view, IPEF is consistent with FOIP and AOIP. So that's why I like to see both Japan and Indonesia contribute to do that. And finally, I'd like to just to bring out two, I think, very important points. I just focused on trade and investment policies in my presentation, but I'd like to see, of course, the continuation of economic cooperation between Japan and Indonesia, particularly in the form of constructing soft and hard infrastructure, particularly high quality infrastructure, and of course in ASEAN. And these are the components of FOIP and AOIP. Finally, I'd like to emphasize the importance of people's exchange at various levels, like tourists, students, academics, bureaucrats, politicians, and people's exchange is a way to increase mutual understanding of each other, and which of course would contribute to a stable relationship between the countries, which will contribute to promotion of the economic growth. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Urata. So we heard some of the policies that ASEAN and Japan can take to respond to some of the challenges, including promotion of regional initiatives. I'll move on to our second speaker, Dr. Vannarith.
Thank you very much, Shafiah, the organizers, CSIS and ERIA for the invitations. I just would like to add on to what Professor Urata mentioned earlier. Okay, with regards to geographical rivalries and the challenges that we're facing, I think obviously strategic trust deficit is the challenge that we're facing. Mutual suspicions tend to grow in tandem with the competition in certain areas of confrontation between major powers. And this trend continue to be a mid-term to long-term trend, at least 10 years. So that is the long-term challenges that we're facing. But how to restore strategic trust, I think is very core issues for our regions, especially relationship between China and the United States. I would like to add also on the economic fragmentations is growing within the region and across the world. You mentioned about the supply chain, reshoring, friendshoring, and nearshoring. So that decision is not only based on market principles, but political and security interests. So that may affect the market. We call it free market economy, this kind of reshoring, friendshoring, and nearshoring strategy. So the politicization and sectorization of economic issue, I think it's more complicated and complex. So that is a challenge. So how can we address those challenges? I think I share the point with Professor Urata that we need to maintain this open regional mechanism, dynamism, with the focus on international law. So I think based on order that we share common interest need to be further strengthened under the framework of FOIP of Japan and the AOIP of ASEAN. Remarkably, Cambodia is the first Southeast Asian country to publicly register support for the Japan version of Indo-Pacific strategy. This strategy complements ASEAN centrality and ASEAN led regional architecture. When it comes to other regional issues, let's say economic integration to address the economic fragmentation or organization, last year we proposed to host as OSCE secretariat. So they already planned and ready for that, but we need to get the support from all the members of ASEP. So Cambodia is willing to host a secretariat of ASEP. Of course, we need the support from ASEAN and dialogue partners. With regards to the issue of Myanmar here, which is one of the key questions, I would like to also recognize the role of Japan, mainly behind the scenes with regards to the Myanmar issue. Last year, Japan and Cambodia worked very closely on Myanmar issues. Cambodia even engaged the Nippon Foundation, the chairman, in order to have the more multi kind of stakeholder engagement strategy and approach toward the Myanmar crisis. But I think we all recognize this is a very complex crisis and no short-term solution to this Myanmar crisis. So it will be a medium-term, at least, crisis in Myanmar. And we also agree that this is a Myanmar-led process, so that we pretty much rely on the political will of different stakeholders in Myanmar. And what ASEAN can do is to facilitate the dialogue and provide necessary support to solve the political crisis there. Of course, ASEAN have done to some extent with regard to humanitarian crisis there, and Japan have strong support, strongly support ASEAN engagement on Myanmar. The last question here is taking the opportunity of ASEAN chairmanship and G7 presidency of Japan. I would like to stress two areas that we should focus. Green recovery. I think Cambodia proposed the ASEAN Green Deal last year. Of course, we haven't developed the concept note and roadmap yet, but I think this is a long-term process of consultation when it comes to ASEAN Green Deal. The ASEAN Economic Club, founded last year in November, have submitted some policy inputs to the Cambodian chair at the time. I think now still on the table for the ASEAN Green Deal, which also include energy transition that we will elaborate in subsequent session, will be very critical moving forward. And this can be the area that ASEAN can work together with Japan and other dialogue partners on building a roadmap and mobilizing resources to realize ASEAN Green Deal. A second point, I think, also will be discussed during our dialogue. The subsequent session here is innovations. So this is a new area. I think the innovation diplomacy, I think Japan can further promote this SDI diplomacy, science, technology, innovation diplomacy, and ASEAN working together to realize a more innovative communities and ecosystem across the region. So I would like to end my remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. I'll move on directly also to the third speaker, Dr. Lina Alexandra, I think who will be focusing on Myanmar issues. Please, Lina.
Thank you, Fifi. Good morning, and once again, thank you for the organizers for inviting me to speak in this excellent event today. So, yeah, as requested by the organizer for me to speak particularly on how Japan and ASEAN has cooperated so far in managing and helping to resolve the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. And previous speaker, Dr. Vannarith, already touched a little bit on the cooperation between Japan and ASEAN during the Cambodian chairmanship. I need to apologize first because I prepared this quite some time ago, and then there has been quite significant changes or development on the ground in Myanmar. Just next, basically just the outline. Next slide, please. Just the outline on what I want to share with you just briefly on the update on Myanmar crisis, as well as the ASEAN's role and the role of Indonesian chairmanship in 2023, and share with you also on Japan's leverage and what more can be done by Japan and ASEAN. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit a while ago in terms of the update, but what I want to add to you now is we have just passed the ASEAN summit just now, and then the ASEAN summit also discussed about this Myanmar crisis. They have a kind of a retreat session at the end, and then President Jokowi made a press statement afterwards as the concluding statement, which contain also some statement on the Myanmar crisis. But what we already know as well, just few days before this event, this summit happened, there was a significant attack, to the convoy. They call it a humanitarian convoy, comprised of 2 Indonesian diplomats, 2 Singaporean diplomats, and 3 staff from the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center. And that significantly, I think, slam ASEAN, right on the face, right on the cheek. And this is a really significant indicator to show that no significant progress on the ground in terms of the implementation of the 5-point consensus, particularly on the cessation of violence in Myanmar. So this crisis, as mentioned also by Dr. Vannarith before, this is a very complex crisis that we are facing in the region. It's a combination of political crisis, it's a humanitarian crisis, as well as the nation building crisis. Because now there has been a significant demand from the stakeholders on the ground in Myanmar for a new system in Myanmar, to become a federal state and so on and so forth. And we can no longer regard the crisis immediately after the coup happened. We know that this is not a domestic crisis, but this is a regional crisis for ASEAN. This is a problem, a significant problem for ASEAN. So no matter what ASEAN has achieved in terms of its progress, and especially under Indonesian chairmanship this year, no matter what priorities are, this Myanmar crisis will always become the problem that ASEAN has to face significantly. And then we also know that currently the major powers, especially those who are also the frontline states in Myanmar, surrounding Myanmar, they also have their own policies. They also implemented some policies as well. The US, for example, has issued to legitimize the provision of non-lethal assistance to the pro-democracy groups. China has made also their movements to conduct negotiations with different ethnic groups, especially at the north, seeking for the stability at the border, to secure, of course, their economic interests. And India also, lastly, they initiated the 1.5 track meeting as a follow-up from the Thai initiative. Next slide, please. So in terms of the ASEAN's role and Indonesian 2020, up until now, ASEAN is still in the position to uphold the 5-point consensus as the main reference, as the main guideline for ASEAN to pursue that approach in Myanmar. And we all know what is in it: cessation of violence, delivery of human assistance, and the intention to conduct to facilitate the all-inclusive dialogue. And we all know now, 2.5 years, almost 3 years of the 5-point consensus, no significant progress that we can see. And also it's after 2 and now already the 3rd special envoys already operated. But then the problem is really, I think it's getting clearer and clearer that ASEAN is very much divided in its approach between those who would like to push, who envision the restoration of democracy in Myanmar, and those who would like to see, ASEAN as interventionistic approach in Myanmar. And these countries particularly see that this is a problem, a domestic problem for Myanmar. as much as we want, of course, to have the Myanmar-led, Myanmar-owned solution to the crisis, but at the same time, I think it's very clear for us, they need the help from the region. They need to help from the regional organization. But at the same time, we also know that ASEAN cannot do it alone. ASEAN will need the support, the assistance from the other countries, especially the major powers, the middle powers, the frontline states that have the leverage in the country. But they need ASEAN to go the level, because they know the one that has the legitimacy to lead the way, to have a sustainable approach in Myanmar is only ASEAN. And so far, we have seen Indonesia, as the chair of ASEAN, has taken some initiatives, some new approach. Second, first, the quiet diplomacy approach. At certain point, it is quite useful because, as stated by our foreign minister a few days ago, that quiet diplomacy has made it possible for Indonesia, through the Office of the Special Envoy, to engage with more stakeholders. And it has been stated that more 60 stakeholders has been engaged. But the point is really, to what extent engaging with more stakeholders actually bring more positive results on the ground? This is the question. If engaging is simply for the sake of engaging or talking with more stakeholders without bearing any significant result, then we cannot really say that this quiet diplomacy approach is effective. And Indonesia will need to look at whether this is a useful approach to be pursued further. And in initial to create the Office of the Special Envoy and so on and so forth. But then the question again also whether Indonesia can also push this up to the level to make it that this will become regional approach. This will become the regional office of the Special Envoy taken up by ASEAN. Next slide, please. So, what the ASEAN Foreign Ministers retreat and so on and so forth. I don't need to talk more because this is already a little bit past because we already have the summit anyway. But as I mentioned earlier, the question is ASEAN have a long-term plan, to pursue this further. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, also that ASEAN requires support and help from others, in which the long-term plan also put that particular initiative to engage with more stakeholders. So implementation plan should contain the points on what ASEAN should do internally, and also on how ASEAN will coordinate its effort with the other major powers. Because I think it is very clear also after the Security Council on Myanmar, there is a very strong commitment, from the international community to ASEAN. If ASEAN continues to not having any significant plan of what it wants to pursue in Myanmar, that will create a lot of confusion for external partners of ASEAN. How they should help ASEAN if ASEAN does not have the strategy itself. So, next slide, please. I think as Dr. Vannarith mentioned also that Japan has taken up some initiative, discreetly to some extent, we call it an invincible diplomacy, to provide some help, although I think Japan is avoiding a position, but at some point also, I think Japan has implemented the suspension of the ODA to Myanmar. And then at the same time, I think it is clear that Japan needs to do more in this case, because obviously Japan has leverage in terms of the trade relation and investment in Myanmar. And also the large significant number of Myanmar diaspora in Japan. And I know that they have done some initiative, you know, they starting from doing the rallies and also giving some support. And the involvement of Nippon Foundation to some extent is also quite useful in terms of pushing for a peace facility groups before. But the thing is here in how ASEAN can really coordinate all these efforts all together to make it effective and synergize, being synergized with what ASEAN wants to pursue in Myanmar. The last step is what more can be done? Japan, I think it is important for Japan to use more leverage to put pressure on the junta. And in terms of the human assistance, it's also needed for Japan to support the existing lifeline that has been channeling assistance into the country, into Myanmar. And what is my conversation with some Myanmar stakeholders, Myanmar friends, you know, there is a very strong need for provision of vaccines, especially for the kids, and also for because the junta has continued to do the airstrikes to continue the crackdown against the civilians and groups. And it is also important to Japan to work with, I mentioned here the selected ASEAN countries because we know again ASEAN has been split up. So to work with the selected ASEAN countries and also with the other non-ASEAN countries to support or facilitate the consolidation of the resistance and ethnic groups in Myanmar. So as a conclusion, I think a peaceful and democratic Myanmar is part of our effort to realize a free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lina. A very comprehensive update on Myanmar issue. Last but not least, Dr. Damuri, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fifi, and good morning to all. It is indeed my pleasure to be part of this seminar and to share my views and thoughts on this issue about ASEAN-Japan economic partnership. I would like to frame my remarks by looking at what I think are the important economic challenges and opportunities that govern the future of ASEAN-Japan economic partnership. Some of my ideas might be similar to what Professor Urata has mentioned earlier, but I think it is important to highlight that if you look at the ASEAN-Japan economic partnership, it's been a while. It's been more around 50 years. I think it's also important to recognize here that that partnership has actually significantly evolved. And indeed, it has also transformed both ASEAN and Japan. For example, we look at ASEAN started as a stable supplier of raw materials and primary commodities. ASEAN has also started to become the production base for Japanese companies. ASEAN has actually evolved, right, into a very productive economy, a economy. And if the estimate is correct, it will become the 4th largest economy in the world by 2030. I think to be sure, if you look at these developments, it is very clear the way I see it that there's no doubt that Japan has contributed to the existing economic dynamism in ASEAN. But I think it is also important to recognize here that when we talk about the future of the ASEAN-Japan economic partnership, there's been a lot of changes in place. And as I mentioned earlier, the partnership has evolved. Therefore, I think talk about or maybe discuss what will be the future for this partnership, I don't think we can still work the same business model, so to speak. Instead, I think what is needed here is that there is a need for more ideas in terms of how we can make this partnership, in my view, not only meaningful, but to be also much deeper and also relevant to both ASEAN and Japan. I think the way I see it, there are 3 important challenges when we talk about the partnership between ASEAN and Japan. Let me discuss these three challenges one by one. The challenge here is how to further deepen regional economic integration between ASEAN and Japan. And for me, the most immediate priority here is to be able to upgrade the existing ASEAN-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. In terms of, for example, expanding the coverage of the agreement itself, for example, perhaps including some specific provisions in the agreement similar to RCEP, or another possibility is perhaps upgrading the trade in services and investment provisions in the agreement. When we look at the Japan economic partnership, I think one thing that stands here is the importance of strengthening supply chain resilience between these countries, between Japan and ASEAN. Particularly in terms of how we can make that resilience enhance the competitiveness and the contestability of markets between ASEAN and Japan. The way I see it, digitalization is very important here in terms of how both economies can move forward. Particularly after the pandemic, we've seen how during this pandemic, the resilience of the supply chains in the region has been significantly changed. And therefore, moving forward, we want to have a more meaningful relationship between ASEAN and Japan. That supply chain resilience has to be effectively addressed. When we talk about this partnership also, I think it is also important to look at how we upgrade the existing ASEAN-Japan FTA. Other partners, FTA partners in ASEAN have started reviewing the FTA. So I think it's about time for ASEAN and Japan to also look at what are the specific provisions within the FTA that need to be updated to make sure that this FTA becomes very meaningful. The second important issue here, the way I see it when we talk about the partnership between ASEAN and Japan, is how to take into account the impact of the global megatrends and new economic realities in the world today. Specifically, the impact of digitalization. I think that is very important. If you look at ASEAN right now, the immediate priority in ASEAN today is how to facilitate the transformation of ASEAN, digital transformation in the region. And I think that would require, in my view, a lot of support and assistance from Japan in a number of areas. Digital adoption in ASEAN, if you've been following the region, has been actually expanding rapidly. But again, the reality is that there are still gaps, right? In terms of, for example, access, affordability, competition, even quality and policies related to digital transformation. That's why I think moving forward, it is important that ASEAN should be able to invest in these different areas. I think, in my view, aside from issues related to focusing, let's say, on digital connectivity and infrastructure, there are still important it's important for the region to address three important areas. One is on digital finance. How we can develop the digital payments to be able to support the expanding e-commerce in the region. The second priority here is digital skills. How can we build the capacities and the expertise to be able to allow everyone to participate actively in the digital world? Third, I think it is also very important to address the issues of policies. What should be the enabling environment in the region that we create a vibrant and dynamic digital economy? And I think the way I see it, Japan has a lot to offer, right, in these different areas, as far as digital transformation in ASEAN is concerned. In my view, when we talk about the collective future of ASEAN, a very important area here is how ASEAN and Japan can work together to provide the technical support to ensure that the global value chains will continue to prosper or to thrive. When you look at digitalization in particular, I think we can use insights from digitalization or from technologies, for example, in terms of using technologies to determine the different risks within the supply chain and what needs to be done to be able to address those shocks and minimize their impact. I think digitalization, particularly in the context of ASEAN and Japan partnership, is also critical in terms of enhancing the industry resilience, whether it is in manufacturing or services industries. Moving forward, what is important here, the way I see it, is that both ASEAN and Japan have a lot of stake in terms of helping each other facilitating the digital transformation. For example, we can use Japan's expertise in terms of providing assistance to ASEAN in terms of the different areas that I've mentioned, whether cooperation in terms of supply chain automation and management. I think that is a very important area. And also assist ASEAN in terms of promoting e-commerce. At the same time, I think Japan's expertise in terms of addressing cybersecurity is also critical. And most importantly here, how Japan can help ASEAN in terms of developing the skills needed in the digital world. During this pandemic, I think we've recognized that in order to facilitate, there's a need, in my view, to be able to intensify cross-border paperless trade. And I think it is also important to highlight here that both in Japan and ASEAN have the capacity to implement important reforms, particular reforms that would use technologies in terms of how we can facilitate trade between each other. I think one very good example here is in terms of trade facilitation. During this pandemic, we've seen how the pandemic has impacted our trade in the region. Through digitalization, it is able to facilitate trade facilitation. And in my view, that is one area that Japan and ASEAN should work together moving forward if we want this partnership to become very meaningful. Finally, and this is my last point, when we talk about the future, the challenges of building the ASEAN-Japan economic partnership, I think it is also important to recognize here that we need to build a collective and sustainable future for both ASEAN and Japan. When the partnership was established more than 50 years ago, considerations of sustainability have been taken into account. But currently, as if you're looking at what's happening in the world today, there is actually a gradual shift, a drastic shift in sentiments into greater sustainability and circularity. And if you look at these are issues that are very important because they threaten very much the stability of the region itself. The ability of both Japan and ASEAN to be able to address these issues on sustainability head-on, in my view, is very critical. And for me, there are two important areas here to talk about sustainability in the context of ASEAN and Japan. One important issue here is on energy transition. Again, I think Japan has a lot to offer here if we want to facilitate energy transition. The possibility here is for Japan to provide cheap cost-saving technologies on energy transition. Japan can also promote technologies to be able to ensure that it will lead to more environmentally friendly region. And at the same time, through technologies, Japan can also build more opportunities in the region. In addition to that, there are also opportunities in terms of how Japan and ASEAN can work together to develop low-cost technologies, as I mentioned earlier, which I think are very critical in terms of facilitating energy transition, particularly in ASEAN. In addition to that, again, when we talk about energy connectivity and efficiency, I think that is also an area where Japan and ASEAN can work together. How to ensure that there is energy efficiency and how to ensure that connectivity between ASEAN and Japan is very much here. Another important area here when we talk about sustainability in the context of ASEAN and Japan is in terms of how are we going to promote or build circular economy in our region. Okay. I think it is important to recognize here the contribution of Japan in terms of resource conservation and reuse of resources. One possibility here, the way I see it, is that perhaps it is now timely for ASEAN to develop some kind of rules on resource recovery and reuse. And I think in that case, we can leverage on the experiences and technologies from Japan. Because over the years, Japan has developed a lot of operational efficiencies on how we can make sure that there are existing rules to address issues related to resource recovery and efficiency. Another important issue here is perhaps the possibility of engaging the expertise of Japan in developing some kind of standards for recycled goods. If only Japan and ASEAN can work together in terms of developing some kind of standards so that we can so that both regions can effectively trade on recycled goods. I think that is one way for ASEAN and Japan to really move forward and enhancing the effectiveness of this partnership. In closing, I think what I'm trying to say here is that this partnership is not cast in stone. In this current environment of a lot of uncertainties, a lot of political tensions, and even global economic fragmentation, I don't think Japan and ASEAN can stick on the same business model here. It is very important that we look at other important issues, and issues related to deepening economic integration, sustainability, and digital transformation are, I think, keys for ASEAN and Japan to be able to move forward and ensuring that in the next 50 years, that the partnership will continue to provide more and more effectively into what ASEAN needs at the moment, and at the same time to make sure that this partnership is not only a lifestyle partnership, but it is something that will beneficially benefit both ASEAN and Japan moving forward. I think those are my thoughts. Again, apologies because I'm an economist, therefore my points are basically related to economics issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rillo. I mean, indeed, we are discussing quite a wide range of issues in this session, you know, from geopolitical rivalry, to economic challenges, regional crisis in Myanmar. We started off a little bit late, but I think the organizers are trying to tell me that we have to finish on time. So do I have like 15 minutes or 10 minutes? 15 minutes. So we have 15 minutes for Q&A. Let's try to use it as efficiently as possible. So I see, okay, 5 hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'll stop right there. I'll take these 5 questions, but please be very succinct, very short, very brief. Let's try. There is a microphone over there. If you could stand up, I'll start with the lady in green. If you would like to ask the first question, use the microphone over there. Briefly introduce yourself and then your question, please, or comments.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abansari. I am from Pakistan, and here I am a student of PhD economics in the Islamic University of Indonesia. So my question is that as China is an important strategic partner and economic player in this region, and it has economics and diplomatic ties with Asian countries, especially through initiatives such as Belt and Road initiatives and regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement. So the stance of China is also very important on this, especially Myanmar crisis. But China is adopting a stance that it is approach not making a sudden and risky approach. So he is, especially China, is making a avoid the basic stance on this topic. So how would you address this China to make it clear about this, especially Myanmar issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Move on to the gentleman next to the lady. Yes.
Hello, thank you. My question is from Dr. Shujiro Urata. The question is, what impact have a recent trade dispute between United States and China had on Indo-Pacific region, and how is ASEAN working to mitigate these effects? And what role do regional trade agreements such as a comprehensive and progressive agreement of Trans-Pacific Partnership play in shaping the economic landscape of Indo-Pacific region? Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the red shirt, please, very brief, sir.
My name is Matthias. I'm just independent research helping the CSIS. I just want to ask about the Secretariat of the Cambodia, because the view from the China is like there is a co-member agreement. What is the Japanese point of view about this co-member supporting on that. On the other thing is, I want to ask about the private partnership here, because Jokowi is more state-owned. Even when during the ASEAN in Hotel Maruora, it's a state-owned hotel. How's the Japanese models in Thailand? Because in Thailand they have the private partnership. They have a fast-track model of PT groups. How does Indonesia is gonna respond, give opportunities for more on this PPP model? Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was a hand up over here. I forgot which. Yes. Can you use the microphone over here? And the gentleman in the back who would like the next question, could you please queue behind the gentleman over here? Thank you. You have to switch it on first, I think. Yes.
Repa Kaftari from Blue Pets Lab. For Dr. Lina, can you tell us about the time frame on to what extent that the Myanmar crisis can become an existential questions for ASEAN cohesion if left unchecked? And also, this is a question for all the speakers. Given the Chinese vested interest in critical rare earth materials mining in northern parts of Myanmar, and to what extent that Myanmar crisis can become an obstacle towards critical rare earth materials supply chain. Thank you.
The next one, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Muhammad Latif Khairi. I'm a student from UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta in International Relations. I want to ask a question regarding how ASEAN and Japan can move forward in about conflict in Myanmar, specifically about coordinating or maybe have a relation with National Unity Government of Myanmar, because back in the ASEAN Summit, Indonesia basically admitted that we have contacted Myanmar's National Unity Government. So now that the summit was over and the G7 will happen in the near future, G7 summit. So can we use that relation or contact between ASEAN, or specifically Indonesia, and UG government, and how can Japan do the same thing by basically inviting them formally or informally to the G7 summit? Thank you.
So there was first 5 questions. Will give the floor back to each of the speakers. Professor Urata, I hope you heard most of the questions. There was one directed at you, and please free to comment on all the other questions. The organizer has informed me we have 10 minutes left, so about 2 minutes each for the speakers. I'm very sorry about this. Professor Urata, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the impacts of China, US, say trade friction or rivalry on, I think, international trade in this region, including maybe Indonesia and Japan. Well, I guess the immediate impact of this trade war between the US and China is somewhat mixed in a sense that some countries in ASEAN, I think, benefited from this, benefited in, may not be the appropriate word to use, but what I'm trying to say is that because, say, US restricted imports from China by increasing tariff, other countries, say like Vietnam, for example, use this opportunity to increase its exports to the United States, and possibly from Vietnam to China as well, because of the China imposed import tariffs, higher import tariffs on imports from the United States. So there are some countries which benefited from this trade friction. But having said this, I recently found the impacts of the, say, US trade restriction on exports of semiconductors and related goods have a negative impact on Japan's exports. To, of course, China, because that's been restricted. It is very important to identify the real impacts of the trade frictions or trade restrictions imposed by the US and China. And I only mentioned about its impacts on trade, but at the same time, we have to look at its impacts on foreign direct investment, because foreign direct investment plays a very important role in deciding or determining the flow of trade. So these are the very quick response to the question, because I only have maybe 2 minutes, maybe I should stop. But in order to mitigate this impact, what I like to say is that this negative impacts may come from largely a lack of transparency of the policies. So in order to improve transparency, it is very important to have a rules-based system, which Dr. Rillo, of course, mentioned. So that's, I think, one way to mitigate the negative impacts of trade friction, having establishing a rules-based system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Urata. Dr. Vannarith?
Thank you for all the questions. I think it's very important, critical questions here. I would like to pick up several of them. First, China factor. Yes, China is the elephant in the room. So, but we need to understand the dynamics, especially between the US and China, and Japan and China relationship also affects the regional economic and security architecture. So that's why we wish to see a stable and healthy China and Japan relation, at least in these regions. And I just would like to echo the principle of transparency. I think this is very important when it comes to trust building that I mentioned earlier. We're facing the problem of strategic trust deficit. And in order to deal with this issue, we need to improve transparency. And in order to improve transparency, we need to follow the same rules and norms. And the AOIP is striving to set rules and norms to manage major power relations and also relations between ourselves with external partners. On the Asean-Japan cooperation Myanmar, I would like to reinforce Dr. Lina perspective on the several proposals that she mentioned, that perhaps Japan have a leverage to put more pressure on the junta to force junta to come to negotiation table and having more inclusive political dialogue. So I think junta is the kind of ball is in the court of junta actually. So Japan has some leverage to use to put pressure on junta to have a political settlement there. Last topic on OSCE Secretariat. Yes, Cambodia proposed it. ASEAN members tend to be okay, but they are not officially supported. But of course, depend on the 5 other member ASEP as well. But of course, when Cambodia hosts, Cambodia need to pay money. It's natural. So, but Cambodia willing to pay money for the Secretariat, no problem. So the PPP, the Belt and Road Initiative and the public-private partnership, yes, this is very important. I think the ASEAN is a very inclusive and open region, so we welcome all initiatives, include the Belt and Road, no problem. In contrary ASEAN interests, so it will be okay to see Japan free and open Indo-Pacific and Belt and Road together, and ASEAN AOIP can be a mechanism to connect all these initiatives and build synergies. So I think it should be okay. Thank you.
That's the ideal, I think. So first, Dr. Lina, and then Dr. 2 minutes each, please.
Yeah, thank you. First question on the China's role in Myanmar. I think it's very clear, of course, China's role is driven ultimately by its interests. And China's interest, I think, is pretty much the same with everyone's interest here, to see peace and stability to be back in Myanmar. Right, but for China, obviously, it's to facilitate or to allow their citizens, their investors, to operate, to do their business in Myanmar. So, and on the other hand, also, I think it's clear that China has made has been very proactive in this case, I must say, that the special envoy, the foreign minister last time also met with the representatives from SAC, and that echoed what Dr. Vannarith mentioned, that the leverage is there. But again, my point is really how ASEAN can tap the leverage. So it's the same thing that what we would like to encourage to other external partners as well, to use the leverage as much as possible to put pressure on the military junta to stop the violence. That's the first important thing. And then the other things can follow afterwards, humanitarian assistance delivery, the dialogue, and so on and so forth. Without that strong leverage from the major powers to put pressure on the military junta, I don't think the so-called ceasefire can happen in the country. The second question in terms of the time frame and also the impact to the global supply chain, I think this is the area that we really need to study further. But obviously, as we know now, some part of Myanmar, especially the northern part, in Kachin area, that's the area where there's a source for the rare earth minerals. So that's very important minerals, I think, is for the industry, electronic, and so on and so forth, even EV, things like that. So, but I cannot really say much on this. But what I learned so far is because of the situation in Myanmar, there has been a very significant increase of illegal activities across the border in Myanmar. And this is something that we need to really respond to as soon as possible, because this will actually disrupt the regional stability and security for sure. And the last question on the ASEAN-Japan and about the NUG, I think on the one hand, it is very clear also Japan, the government of Japan, from the outset, has made the point that Japan will support the promotion of democracy in Myanmar. And I think to some extent we know that, and I also learned this from the Japanese diplomats here in Jakarta, at the Nippon Foundation, Mr. Sasakawa, despite of his own efforts, to facilitate peace in with the ethnic groups and so on and so forth, that he actually does not represent the government of Japan. So the Japanese government has a very clear standpoint on this to promote democracy. And this is something, the area where ASEAN can actually cooperate to promote democracy and also to use the leverage, of course, more importantly, to put pressure on the junta in order to strengthen the democratic elements in the country. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think just very briefly on the Myanmar issue. Personally, I look at it as more a political issue, and I hope that this will not undermine economic cooperation in ASEAN. Because if you look at the past experience, for example, in the early 2000s, during the time when the situation in Myanmar was also very difficult, I remember that during that time, despite the embargo and the restrictions on Myanmar, economic cooperation in ASEAN continued to flourish. So I believe that in the case of ASEAN, while there are some kind of adjustment and wrinkles in terms of this crisis, I think that the economic cooperation will continue. And I really hope that Japan, being an important player in the region, will still provide the support to the people of Myanmar. Because I think the issue of capacity of human development is very critical here. And therefore, if we also get this jeopardized, I don't think the situation in Myanmar will get any better. So looking at what's happening in Myanmar right now, for me, it's a political issue. But again, there is still a significant hope that the economic implications will not be that adverse, and that I hope that the cooperation on the economic side will continue to remain strong as well. Thank you.
So this has been very rich and very insightful first session of today, which I hope will be followed by some more specific issues in the second and third sessions as well. So please join me in thanking the fourth speaker, Professor Urata, who's in Japan. Thank you so much. And I will hand back to Nadia, the MC.
Thank you for the very insightful panel. Next, we'll be moving on to the next agenda, our Luncheon talk. We'll discuss the potentials in the renewable energy sector. Moderating the session is Pak Riyadi Suparno, the Executive Director of Tenggara Strategics. Pak Riyadi, we welcome you to the floor. Thank you to our moderator and also our honorable speakers for today.
Good morning, everyone. So we are now entering the lunch talk. Well, I said talk for lunch, so we can provide good food for thought. So we have two notable speakers for the lunch talk, but I will introduce first the first speaker. Our first speaker is coming all the way from Tokyo, Mr. Izuru Kobayashi. Mr. Izuru Kobayashi is Deputy Commissioner for International Affairs, Agency for Natural Resources and Energy at the Ministry of Economics, Trade and Industry, or METI. Mr. Kobayashi So Mr. Kobayashi, he received his master degree from Yale University and BA in law from University of Tokyo. He was also the executive director for Renewable Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, and also the CEO for Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, and he was based in Jakarta. So he knows quite a lot about Indonesia. And last March, early March, we met the CSI strategy in Tokyo. It's a renewable energy event, Japan RE Invest Indonesia 2023. And at that time, it was conducted together on the sideline of Asia Zero Emission Community Initiative, or AZEC. And Mr. Kobayashi is very instrumental in that initiative, involving countries in Asia, Japan, ASEAN, and Australia. We will talk more about ASEC and what will benefit Indonesia on that. So I will invite Mr. Kobayashi. Please give us an applause for Mr. Kobayashi.
Well, Bapak-bapak, ibu-ibu, saudara sekalian yang saya hormati, saya Kobayashi, saya bekerja di Kementerian Ekonomi, Perdagangan dan Industri. I have to stop here for my poor Indonesian. Thank you very much for the introduction. Excellency Ambassador Kiya, Ambassador of Japan for ASEAN, Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri of CSIS, my good friend. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this event. I'm very grateful to be one of the lunch speakers. And as you know, Japan is promoting the Zero Emission Community, as was introduced. This initiative is led by the Prime Minister Kishida himself. And today I'd like to explain its approach towards energy transitions and update you on the current status. Next slide, please. Okay, due to the growth, its global share of greenhouse gas emission is now more than 50%. So decarbonization in Asian region is a key to achieving global carbon neutrality. The Paris Agreement aims to achieve carbon neutrality by the middle of this century. This is that the coal-fired power plants shall be phased out as soon as possible and need to be shifted to renewables. In fact, this approach is very rational as energy transition policy for European countries. The question is if it is workable for Asian countries or not, and I would like to argue this point first. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Okay, so we all know that the fossil fuel production is unevenly distributed globally. The potential of renewables is actually also disproportionately distributed. This map is named Wind Atlas, developed by World Bank. Red areas have strong wind potential, and the light blue areas have weak potential for the wind. As you can see, Europe has enormous offshore wind potential. At COP26, Boris Johnson said UK will become the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind power. And in fact, there are only a few countries in the world that has the UK level offshore wind potential. On the other hand, very unfortunately, Southeast Asia does not have very high potential for wind power. We need to be aware of this when we discuss energy transition of Southeast Asia. Next, please. Next, yes. And what about solar? This map is named Solar Atlas, indicating the potential of solar power in the world. Southeast Asia actually has more irradiation than Japan, and it has decent potential from this viewpoint. Next, please. The change in solar power in Southeast Asia is not irradiation, but precipitation. This map is indicating the distribution of arid areas, and there is almost no dry land areas in Southeast Asia. As a result, two challenges arise. First, it is difficult to secure large land areas that can host large solar farms. Because Southeast Asia is rich in nature and has strong agricultural industry and large population, there are not so much unused land area, especially close to the power demand areas. Japan is actually facing the same issue. Now it is very difficult to develop large solar farms with the size of more than 2 megawatts or more in Japan. Southeast Asia still has much room to develop, so it's important to work on developing the more solar farms. But land availability is going to be a challenge in the future. Second, exacerbation of intermittency. Solar power is highly intermittent in nature. However, as long as it is sunny, the intermittency by storing electricity at peak generation hours and then release it when solar panels don't produce electricity. However, solar panel generates only 10 to 20% on rainy days compared to sunny days. So grid networks of, for example, Indonesia, are relatively small, independent to each other. Many of them can be covered by cloud for a few days in a row. So if you try to make solar power a main source of power in such a grid networks, you need batteries that can store a substantial amount of electricity for rainy days, or need to keep thermal power plants and fuels for backups. Solar in wet areas with small grid size is actually more challenging than the dry areas. Next, please. Next, I would like to touch on the historical change in the source of power generation. These graphs indicate the transition of the energy mix in the developed countries. In advanced economies, the amount of power generation, which is same as the electricity demand, has been flat or even decreasing in these years. Therefore, in order to increase renewables, it is necessary to reduce the share of other sources. In Europe, gas has been provided by pipelines since the 1990s and reasonably priced until the Russian aggression took place. And therefore, coal-fired power plants have lost their competitiveness against gas-fired power plants, and there have been almost no new installations since the 1990s. Existing coal-fired power plants in European countries are obsolete and have been fully depreciated already. Accelerating employment of renewables, which is domestically produced energy source, and it is very clean. And replacing them to the coal-fired power plants is very, very rational energy policy. The graph on the upper left shows the transition of the electricity mix of the European countries, and as the wind, which is the orange part of this graph, increases, coal-fired power plants share, the dark gray part at the bottom of the graph decreases. I also would like to highlight one more thing. To accelerate deployment of renewables, European countries set extremely high deployment targets of renewables. It is possible because they have excess power production capacity due to the electricity demand and rapid increase of renewables capacity. In 2021, actually the wind in Europe was much weaker than expected. Therefore, they increased the use of coal-fired power plants to generate electricity to avoid from blackouts. That is actually indicated in the graph as a small hike of the share of the CFPs in 2021. European energy authorities maintain sufficient redundancy of the system to avoid power outage, and that's the beauty of the European power policy. And actually, Japan is the same. Japan has very aggressive renewable energy targets, energy conservation targets, and the research plan of nuclear power plants. However, even if we miss these targets, we can actually avoid power outage as far as we keep sufficient amount of thermal power plants. However, the situation could be different in some Asian countries. Next slide, please. Well, first, in Asian countries, energy demand is increasing rapidly. The upper left chart is the electricity mix of ASEAN as a whole. And in ASEAN, electricity demand has increased significantly in the last 2 decades. And the power plants were constructed to fill the gap between the existing power production capacity and future demand. Therefore, power plants are new and not yet depreciated. So dismantling these CFPs are financially very painful. Second, more importantly, when the electricity demand increases, the capacity of stable source of power needs to be increased to avoid potential blackouts. Southeast Asia has relatively small wind power potential, and it is challenging to use solar as the stable source of power. Of course, it is very, very important to make an ambitious plan to introduce renewables, including intermittent ones, and keep utmost efforts to achieve them. And some countries might be able to go for the early dismantling of the coal-fired power plants. However, we need to keep in mind that these actions might be associated with certain risks. Basically, the capacity of stable power sources needs to be increased to catch up growing electricity demand. So it means that we need to increase either hydropower, thermal power, or nuclear power to really provide the stability to the grid. And also, under such circumstances, dismantling coal-fired power plants, which is actually a stable source of power, increases the risk of imbalance in power market, which can actually result in the blackouts. Next slide, please. Next, please. Next. Okay, so as you can see, the energy situation in Asia is very different from that in Europe. And even within Asia, the situation is actually diverse. So the goal of carbon neutrality by the middle of this century needs to be the same. However, we probably need to consider diverse and pragmatic pathways of energy transition in accordance with the circumstances of respective countries. And Japan believes energy transition needs a good balance among climate change, stable energy supply, and economic growth. In some countries, the approach of retiring CFPs and replacing them with renewables is a reasonable way to pursue these three goals. However, some countries need to consider carefully in taking such approaches. That's what we think. And next one. Okay. So that's the basic concept of Asia Zero Emissions Community. The Asia Zero Emissions Community, AZEC, was announced by the Prime Minister Kishida last January. It is a platform to promote cooperation among Asian countries to take on the challenges of decarbonization based on mutual trust. Under AZEC, Japan would like to work on two things. First, policy coordination among member countries to accelerate energy transition while taking into account the diversity of respective countries. For example, establishing the standards of energy efficient products and the definition of green hydrogen and ammonia. These could be one of the topics of the policy coordination under AZEC. And second, Japan would like to support concrete infrastructure projects for the energy transition of member countries through organizations such as JBIC, JICA, JOGMEC, and others, aiming for expansion of new technologies and their cost reductions. AZEC will of course work on renewables, energy efficiency, and grid management. However, at the same time, it will also work on technology to reduce carbon footprint of thermal power plants such as CCUS, biomass co-firing, and also hydrogen and ammonia co-firing. And not only these technology, but also increasing natural gas and LNG. Because using thermal power generation for the time being is necessary for Asia. And how to reduce the emission from these activities is quite important. Also covers decarbonization activities for the transportation industry and also critical minerals. We intend to work on the variety of technologies and projects without exceptions. Next, please. So this concept of AZEC was well received by the energy transition authorities of Asia. And the first AZEC ministerial meeting was held in Tokyo on March 4th this year. The meeting was chaired by Mr. Nishimura, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Japan, and attended by the another Minister Nishimura, Minister of Environment as well. And from Indonesia, Excellency Mr. Arifin Tasrif, the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, who actually addressed in this morning, participated in this meeting. Next, please. In the meeting, METI Minister Nishimura explained the basic concept as follows. Pursue decarbonization and energy security simultaneously, and energy transition needs to contribute to economic growth in Asia. And there are various pathways to achieve carbon neutrality based on the situation of respective countries. These points are reflected in the joint statement, and the statement also mentions the importance of cooperation with international organizations such as IEA, ERIA, and ACE. ASEAN Center of Energy. Next. Next, I skipped this slide. Next, please. Okay, so actually this year Japan holds the G7 presidency, and we share the concept of one goal, various pathways, with the G7 colleagues, and the importance of pursuing climate change, energy security, and economic growth simultaneously in the meeting. AZEC is also mentioned in the communique of a ministerial meeting as one of the important initiatives. Next. Okay, so as I said, Prime Minister Kishida himself is initiating AZEC, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of the ASEAN-Japan relationship. And the special Asean-Japan summit is scheduled at the end of this year, as Ambassador Kiya mentioned. We plan to hold the ASEC senior officials meeting in Jakarta in the next month, to discuss actions of ASEC. And we believe it is important for ASEC to conceive, advance, and materialize many energy transition projects to be developed by the private sector. So we will do our best to materializing the concept of ASEC through these activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kobayashi-san. So, because time is running, I will invite the second speaker, but I will introduce shortly about the second speaker. He is the CEO of the largest green energy company in Indonesia, PT Pertamina Geothermal Energy, or PGE. So, he is Mr. Ahmad Yuniarto. Please, Pak. Please welcome Pak Ahmad Yuniarto.
Good afternoon to His Excellency the Ambassadors, Pak Yose Rizal. Terima kasih sudah diundang untuk bergabung ke siang hari ini. Selama ini Pertamina Geothermal Energy juga berpartner dengan CSIS terutama untuk acara-acara yang terkait dengan renewable energy. And thank you. It is an honor for us to be here. ET Pertamina Geothermal Energy Tbk is part of the Pertamina's group. It is majority owned by Pertamina. Early this year, we have successfully listed in Jakarta Stock Exchange, or now it's called the Indonesia Stock Exchange. And we are spearheading Pertamina's energy transition strategy as part of the new business unit that is established in Pertamina called Pertamina New and Renewable Energy. And set to not only support Pertamina, but in a wider sense, strategically support Indonesia's aim to be carbon neutral by 2060. Pertamina Geothermal Energy itself is one of the largest geothermal company in the world. Currently, we manage the largest number of geothermal work area in Indonesia. There are 13 work areas that we manage in Indonesia. We have directly operate 672 megawatt, and also we manage 1.2 gigawatt of green, clean geothermal baseload power generation through joint operation scheme. It is interesting that previously the speaker mentions about the need to increase the component of stable power source, or essentially the baseload. And when we are talking about energy transitions, this is actually critical. If we could go to the next one, please, Hanum. Thank you. That any energy system or any power system requires a stable baseload. And when we transition into renewable or much more sustainable and emission-free energy system, then definitely we also need a renewable baseload. And geothermal here is one of the most fitting renewable baseload. And as such, Pertamina Geothermal Energy, definitely by focusing on the development of geothermal resources here in Indonesia, and hopefully that we also make an impact regionally and also globally, that we play a very strategic role in the energy transitions by providing the much required stable, dispatchable, renewable baseload. And it's also very, very important to note that related to energy security, geothermal is indigenous resources in Indonesia. And I agree And I have been arguing also that each country, each regions need to develop indigenous strategy for the energy transitions, essentially matching between the energy resources as well as the geographical setting and the particular challenges that that particular country, that particular regions need. And in Indonesia, what we believe is that geothermal really fits within the energy strategy as well as the energy security of Indonesia, because not only the abundance of the resources, Indonesia has the largest potential of geothermal resources globally, up to the equivalent of 24 gigawatt of equivalent electricity that sits in Indonesia. And currently we only develop and use up to 10% of it. So there's ample room to grow. And it is the missions of Pertamina Geothermal Energy to work together with strategic partners, potentially strategic partners. And we have been working for quite some times with Japanese institutions, either through a financing scheme as well as partnerships in technology development, and we will continue to do so in ultimately utilizing to the maximum the potential of geothermal resources here in Indonesia. When we see going forward, Pertamina Geothermal Energy is not just wanting to be a larger geothermal company, but we also look into the potential of geothermal resources into overall decarbonization effort, not only in Indonesia, but also globally. Hence, we aspire to be a world-class green energy company and expand the value creations from geothermal resources beyond electricity. Because then what we believe, by doing so, we also enlarge the impact of geothermal resources, and as well as the impact from a company like Pertamina Geothermal Energy in the energy transition, as well as the effort of decarbonization. So we are currently having an ongoing partnership with Japanese institutions like TEPCO and NIDO in preparing to pilot a production of green hydrogen and green ammonia based on geothermal resources. And that type of partnership, that type of explorations in creating additional value from geothermal resources is definitely going to be impactful in not only for Indonesia, but also regionally. Not only from the energy sector aspect, but overall into the what we call green economic multiplier effect generation. And this partnership with TEPCO and NIDO is an example of a partnership to amplify and to recreate with other parties, because it's not only focusing on the technological aspect of the development of geothermal resources, but it's also looking into the whole value chains of green hydrogens and green ammonia, right? From the upstream side of it, of the productions, all the way into the ultimate off-taker. And that is very, very important, because as we see, any investment in the upstream side will mean very little. We are not having a complete value chain being developed and having economic generations in the end. And to do that, Pertamina Geothermal Energy also working very, very hard in developing our capability and credential, global credential, a world-class credential to be ready in building strategic partnerships with whomever could help us in realizing our ambitions. And when we look into the strategic partnerships, there are 4 areas that we are looking in forging the partnership. One is a potential strategic partnership that could expand and continue grow our capability, complete our capability. Second, strategic partnerships that could help us in accessing innovations and technologies. Third is strategic partnerships that could also help us in creating a new product, new demand, and accessing a new market. And last but not least, strategic partners that will help us definitely in accessing creative and competitive financing. And we do believe that Japan has all the potentials to be strategic partners, not only for the Pertamina geothermal energy, but also for Indonesia and also for the Asian regions, especially in developing and solving together the wicked problem, energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas Ahmad Yuniarto. With that, actually, I will try to summarize a bit of our talk today. So, Mr. Kobayashi was introducing the AZEC, the Asia Zero Emission Community Forum, which is comprising Japan, ASEAN countries, and Australia, to promote cooperation, coordination on energy transition. So they are working together on projects on some energy transition. And this is actually connected with the second speaker, Mr. Ahmad Yuniarto, speaking about renewable energy, and is talking about beyond electricity. So PGE, the Pertamina Geothermal Energy, is working together with TEPCO from Japan on transforming the geothermal energy into hydrogen and ammonia. With that, I think I should close the session because we are competing with lunch. Thank you again. Please give round of applause to our two speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the short, very insightful session. Thank you for our moderator, Pak Riyadi, and also for our speakers today, Mr. Izuru Kobayashi and also Pak Ahmad Yuniarto. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to display the link for the QR code and also the online form for e-certificates. Please fill out your names and emails correctly, as the e-certificates will be sent out based on the information collected through the form. You may scan or you may type the link out shortly, as it will be displayed soon. Our next agenda is the lunch break. Lunch will be served in the pre-function room, which is right in front of this room, toward the front of the auditorium. Our committee will help you guide to the area. It will last for 45 minutes, and the second panel session will start promptly at 1 p.m. We will meet you back in the auditorium soon, and have a good lunch break.